These bikes, they have what's known as an accelerator pump program as part of the ECU. And what that does, and different bikes have different versions of it. Some don't have it at all. Some have very aggressive ones. They all work a little bit differently, right? So basically what it is that when you're just cruising on a steady state or a low amount of throttle, or just like a steady state of throttle, so if I hold the throttle at 20%, the base fueling, so in terms of the amount of fuel that the injectors are throwing at the bike, so your AFR at that point, might be a bit lean for emission, a bit lean on purpose for better emissions and also better fuel economy, so that you're not just wasting fuel. If you're not accelerating, you don't really need a lot of fuel. So even if you're doing 100 on a freeway, or and you're just holding a static throttle, just holding that speed, you'll be surprised you don't need a lot of fuel to maintain that speed. So what the bikes do is they actually cut or save fuel, so they run quite lean in that condition. Then what happens if you go to roll it on, that's when you need the fuel. So you're starting to accelerate. And what they do then is they just chuck a whole bunch of fuel at it. So you might have your base fuel map that it's using to saying the rider's at this percentage throttle, 4,000 RPM, this is how much fuel I need to add. Yep, they go from 20 to 20 at 25 just nicely. This is how much fuel to add. But then they whack it to 40 or 45%. Because it was running in that lean condition for cruising and fuel economy, what happens then is it would starve of fuel, or would hesitate because there's not enough fuel. So the ECU has an accelerator pump program in it that says if the rider does that, chuck some fuel at it, for a split second. This bike does it, and what we're showing you here with this graph, if you like, is all the green lines. So you've got your the throttle position, and then above that you've got the AFR trace. All the green lines are just a static throttle where you're cruising, and then the red stuff is where I'm wrapping on the throttle, on the dyno, so that to see what that fuel pump, the accelerator pump is doing. And you can see that you've got those rich dips in the AFR, but then it comes back to a steady state once you stop wrapping it on. So you'll be, in the real world, if you're just accelerating slowly, it doesn't need the accelerator pump. It's fueled well enough. But if you give it a bit of a whack, it needs that extra fuel. It'll throw it, but it won't leave it there because you've whacked it. Then you'll come back to a more steady state throttle, so it comes back to a normal AFR. So when we're tuning, and like I said, it's different for every different type of bike. Some have them, some don't. Some have them at different RPM ranges. This one actually works for quite a lot of area of the RPM range and throttle positions. So when we're doing a tune, that's a big part of the tune process that we do, is that we're not only just assessing the static state throttle, we're actually doing a whole bunch of roll-on tests to see how the bike behaves. So that then when we do our base tune, so all the base maps of this bike, that we're putting them into an area that allows for that accelerator pump, so that if you do whack it, it doesn't go too rich, and that it's working in a right area. So when it comes to those AFR lines, some people this is maybe a bit people who are interested in auto tuners, and we've done some videos on that in the past. Unless you have a super sophisticated auto tuner and you know how to monitor, you need to be very, very careful, because there's no such thing as a perfect AFR number for every condition. And what I mean by that is, sure, there might be a perfect AFR at 100% throttle close to the red line, because that's where it's going to make its most amount of power. But if we go back to our example of, we're using 20% throttle, for example, just cruising, the AFR it needs for cruising is a lot leaner than it needs if you were passing through 20% on a wrap-on, right? So that'll be different. So you could take the same situation that you'd say, let's say for this bike, 5,000 RPM, 20% throttle, right? Now, when you're looking at a fuel table or an auto-tune table, for those who are familiar with them, you're going to have 20% throttle, 5,000 RPM, and you're going to have a number there, or a factor, if you like, so if you want to make it richer or leaner. And an auto tuner is going to record, or the probe's going to record, what the AFR number is. It might tell you that it's 13.3, might tell you it's 13.1, might tell you it's 12.8, whatever it is, right? However, because of that accelerator pump and understanding how the ECU works, you also have to understand the condition of what's happening. So if it's at a cruising state, you want that AFR to be much leaner. And if you're passing through it on a roll-on or a hard acceleration, it needs to be richer. So if you don't have a very sophisticated auto-tuner and you're not sure what you're doing, you can actually get really, really lost and put a really bad tune in bike because you might set a target for like 13.0, for example, at the AFR, but it's trying to lean off the roll-on and then it's not going to accelerate the way it works. Or conversely, that you're doing a lot of cruising and the auto-tuner is going, okay, 13 needs to be 13.0, so it just keeps making it richer and richer and richer because that's what the auto-tuner is doing. And then when you go to roll it on, it actually bogs down because it's way too rich then. So really, and that's why we don't recommend auto-tuners as a DIY thing, if you like, because they shouldn't be. Like if we were to put an auto-tuner on this bike compared to a Yamaha R1, for example, the parameters would need to be massively different because the ECU, the base ECU behaves massively differently. So what we're doing with the tune in the AFR side of life is at 100% throttle, like in those conditions, because when you wrapped on, that's an easy one to do. And that's mostly what most dynographs show you is the 100% throttle, right? That's an easy one to get the AFR quite nice. Where you see, like, it's not about getting a perfect AFR line. It's about understanding how it's all going to work together. And then, so that's what we do there is try to keep everything in most riding conditions, most throttle positions, most RPMs, that it's going to be in an area that works. And that if the bike's got an aggressive accelerator pump, that in the smaller stuff and the slower stuff, we're keeping the bike a little bit lean to allow for that accelerator pump, if that makes sense. So it's all about the entire power delivery and the entire rev range, all the throttle positions combined together, understanding how the ECU works to deliver what you ultimately will feel on the road. And that's smooth, usable power delivery, but also that just puts a smile on your face because you're getting rid of all the bits that are too lean or too rich, so that the bike just responds and feels as it should. And then from that point, what you're ultimately doing is just getting to enjoy what is ultimately a beautiful engine. So